Welcome to Prog Will Find a Way, your friendly neighborhood podcast all about progressive rock. I'm Jay Valade.
And I'm Jonathan Block. And been a lot of podcasts on Emerson Lake and Palmer's classic album Love Beach lately.
Which is kind of funny.
It is kind of funny. So we figured we'd get into the fray with that. I'm not sure if this is going to be well, I will be defending the Indefensible, right?
And I'll be just agreeing with everybody else.
So,
the thing is not.
Well, traditionally, everybody, I mean, poo-poo, and you could actually get Spinal Tapish about it, right? Like the
Absolutely.
one, like the review shouldn't, the review should have been, shit beach, right? But we can get into all that. What people seem to forget, is that the album came out in November of 1978. By the end of January 1979, it had been certified gold. It had sold 500,000 copies. And however, grab yours.
So
I have a feeling.
I am right now taking, for those of you listening and not watching, I have my vinyl copy of Love Beach, which of course I bought as a cutout because
yes. So that's always the age-old question. How many copies did they actually sell that did not get returned?
Right.
However you slice it, this album sold pretty well for what it was.
Yeah, I think that ELP was still at that, and everyone kind of says that punk killed Prog, but at the end of the 70s, Prog was still doing a good business.
Yeah.
I mean, ELP was still, they didn't go live for this album, but they were, stadiums for the 77 tour, right? Of Works, right? And Yes was still doing their in the round stuff, and Genesis was actually bubbling up and becoming this major touring act. So, and Floyd, of course, was, the Wall had not even come out yet. So there was still all of that happening.
But Floyd's the only one who could go 2-3 years between albums and no one said anything. That's the norm now, right? Yeah. I mean, a lot of these bands, I mean, it's just simple burnout. That's why people left. Yeah. It was like they couldn't, either you couldn't take a break, you had to quit or break up the band. It's
right.
Well,
I think John and I were talking about this before, that ELP had run its course at the end of the Works tour,
which ended in March of 1978. So they had toured almost close to a year, and not just Volume 1, then Volume 2 came out as well.
But Volume 2 was really like an odds and sods, right? It was like
it was
bits and pieces.
And it was also like, I think the first, like, I mean, we're not talking. Yeah, we have this album here as well.
Volume 2.
I may make some comparisons to that when talking about this album, because it's not like Love Beach just dropped out of the sky.
Yeah, but I think Works Volume 2 was less I think that was, to me, it looked more like a record company compilation than it was a band.
Right. Because it was singles as well. It was almost like a Jethro Tull Living in the Past. It was like some unreleased stuff and singles that had come up or never anything, like Tiger in the Spotlight, and the song Brain Salad Surgery.
And Father Christmas is on there too.
Father Christmas is on there, and the B-side to Brain Salad Surgery, When the Apple Blossoms, blah, 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 that tune. So a lot of good songs on there, but we're not here to talk about Works 2. We're here to talk about Love Beach. So as Jay was saying, Works tour ends in 78. They want to take a break. Amit Ergin from Atlantic is like, can you guys just get us another album? And by the way, you have one more album on your contract, and we want it this year. Yeah. And could you make it commercial? So then the story's like, Keith's just like, you know what? I'm going to stop pushing against this. Greg can have his album side. So Greg got his album side. There's a lot of stuff around this album. Then they want to be tax exiles, so they go to Bahamas, right? And then the manager of ELP is like, calls up Pete Sinfield and was like, hey, the guys are here. And at this point, apparently Pete and Greg are not really getting along too well. But anyways, he gets some money and a free trip. So he's like, sure, but I have to work alone,
Oh, I don't know any of this.
Yeah. But he gets there and they're barely talking to each other.
So did Sinfield write all the lyrics, or was it a...
I think I think he wrote. I think Greg may have given him some stuff, and it may have gone back and forth. But he wrote predominantly a lot of the lyrics, or at least started them up. There's certainly the lyrics on side 1. He did all the lyrics for Keith's piece for side 2.
Yeah.
but there's parts of pieces on side one where it's like that's definitely
Well, and
Sinfield.
it's credited to him, right? It's Lake
Yeah,
Sinfield, Lake Sinfield, Lake.
yeah, everything Sinfield Lake.
But the
The
lyrics
lyrics
to
are,
me are the worst part of this album.
and you are fully correct. And to quote Keith Emerson, the lyrics are gross. They're gross.
They're
I
just
mean,
they're
and I don't mean that in Modern Sensibilities. This came out. My brother bought this album when it came out, the week of Thanksgiving. He was home for college. We listened to it. I heard it the day it came out, and I was 14 or 15. And so, and some of these lyrics, I'm like, I mean, you're 14 or 15 years old. At some point, you're like, ooh, I want to play my albums for my girlfriend or whatever the girl. I'm like, and seriously, I remember this clear day. I'm like, I can't play this for. I said this to my brother. I'm like, I can't play any of this for a girl. Like, what are they doing?
it's the
It's
it's
embarrassing.
it's the worst.
It's embarrassing. And I've played around with, the juxtaposition with that is like musically, I think the album is great. Well, great's too strong of a word. However, to
It
me,
is.
this is Carl Palmer's best drum performance, both in his performance and the recorded sound. He sounds
Really?
amazing on this, and he does some wild stuff on this album that he never did. I want to interview Carl Palmer just to find out what was going through his head, because he does some fills and some stuff in here that he never repeated. Like he was just in some kind of zone.
It
I
was
don't
in
know if it was because of
the Bahamas and the steel drum bands.
it could have been. No, but there's something about his, I just think, besides the album, if you have any of the CD releases, or if you go to if you listen to the album streaming, there were two remasters that came out.
Yeah, I listened to
One,
the 2017 that had all these extra mixes.
yes, well, there's actually one from 2011
Okay.
that had two of the same tracks on that, but had a rehearsal version of Taste of My Love that they didn't put on the later remaster, which is a bummer because there's no lyrics and there's a whole middle section that didn't make it to the
Got
album.
it.
And you're like, oh my gosh, okay, well, maybe just have that as an instrumental. It would have been great. There's so many minor tweaks. Because I've listened to this album since it came out and always wanted it to be more than it was. I've always toyed around in my head with like different track listings.
Yeah.
And I got to the point where I was like, okay, I can't bring anything external out and I can't chop things up. Because the other thing is, on the second side, even though it's a full long suite, it's got its own problems. However, one of my favorite ELP moments is that instrumental bit in Letters from the Front, which is the best thing on this album by light years.
Yeah. Truthfully, the instrumental parts I don't have any issue with, except for some of the keyboard sounds. They're, we were listening to it in the car prior to this with my wife and I, and she goes, "What is this? The Disney nighttime parade?"
Yeah.
On the water where beep beep boop, beep beep. Boop. I'm like, it kind of sounds like that.
Or when he does the, what's it's got to be, taste of my, get on your stallion, and then he does the like trumpeting.
And then when he does the
I know.
the Asian sounds in the back,
I
I'm
know, I
like,
know. Well, that whole song is problematic. We can get into that song individually, but you're right. Well, and you started hearing that in Works. He went off the Moogs. I mean, he went to the Yamaha. He went to that big Yamaha GX something,
and it was
that
the
did,
sound of the day.
yeah,
Right?
but it's
a little,
farty. The farty
yeah,
sounds. There's a
yeah.
lot of farty sounds, but he used a lot of those sounds throughout his career. The other interesting thing about this is that Greg and Carl finished their parts and they left. They bolted. Keith finished the album.
Oh, he did.
So, and when you hear some of those rehearsal tracks from those remasters, none of those weird affectational sounds are on there. He put that on after.
Okay.
Because those rehearsal tracks are
Better.
so much better, you know?
I don't like the production. I don't
Yeah.
like the sound. I don't like the lyrics. Greg Lake's vocals are overwrought. They're just
Yeah.
they're too. And even just the memoirs. The thought of it. I think when I first listened to it way back when I got this album, I was like, it's kind of a cool like thing, but it sounds a little too Broadway and not
Yeah.
not successful
Right.
Broadway.
To
You know,
your Greg being over the top, definitely side two. I actually don't think he's over the top on side one. And on
um,
side two,
what was Gambler is the only song on this album that I like because it reminds me of their fun
it's the
stuff
fun
from
Jeremy Bender, the
right,
sheriff,
right. So I mean, I'm
Benny
like,
the bouncer,
that's the only thing
lineage.
I like.
All right,
Be-
let's start getting
Wait, but
into.
before we get there,
Oh yes, of course. Now, unfortunately, on the podcast you won't see this, but
if you're
the
working on
album.
YouTube,
Yeah, if you purchase the album in the day, you could then get
you
yourself
could get yourself Love
Love
Beach
Beach
gear.
gear,
Yeah,
a nice
we got
tracksuit,
shorts. We got a
shirts.
we got a custom made to order satin jacket. We got
Yep.
some black t-shirts, and a yeah,
The shorts, by
the
the way, those
shorts.
are okay. So the real shorts, like we're talking.
They're the
This
jogging
is
shorts from
this is
1978, which
1978.
means
So
they barely.
what Dukes of Hazzard, man, Daisy Dukes, right? That's what they're called. But yeah, so
Who wouldn't want these?
yeah,
I mean, they have to be collector's items at this point,
I don't
right?
know. I never got mine,
You know, Love Beach shorts. Are you kidding me?
Well, it's the funny thing though is that then they had the album, but they had the prices. So your
Oh,
satin jacket, the T-shirt was $6.50. Now the satin jacket was not cheap. That was $70. And the
back then,
yeah, and the jogging shorts were $7.50. You sent your money to Manticore, their management
yeah.
company, somewhere in Illinois.
I wonder if you got anything.
I don't
Then
know.
then inside they had
Yeah,
the spread of
right.
the ELP catalog at that point.
Yep. Which
Without
which
Works
is
Volume
crazy,
2.
right? And
Without Works
which
Volume
right
2.
too. And you know what? Their catalog is small. Like they didn't
Yeah,
have a
they
lot of
didn't have a
albums.
ton.
I mean, they were definitely one of my favorite bands growing up, and I still love them, even though I find a lot of stuff about them problematic these days. But there's something about this album only because I've listened to it, and musically, like I said, because I remember in the day, Letters from the Front was the only thing, in the Gambler. So
Yeah.
I had to get a tape deck, and then I'd get the record, and I had to know to wait for it to get right before then, and
Oh,
then
to make
get
a
it.
mixtape?
Yeah, and get it before Greg Lake started singing Letters. But yes, the lyrics are the worst thing. The cover part two is the cover is the second thing. However, in the day I put it on cassette and never looked at the cover again.
Yeah.
So
The cover is, for those of you who
who've never
don't
seen
know,
the album.
it's as if the Bee Gees
Right.
came to
Yeah.
inhabit the
Funny
Emerson.
thing is that they made it worse because they did some airbrushing and stuff. And in one of the remasters, they have a number of photos that are not that way, where they're looking more natural, standing in the water and stuff. It's like, why didn't you use any of those? Like any of them would have looked
And
that.
just the name.
Yeah, well, Keith Emerson was pissed because Atlantic named it. They didn't name it.
Oh, really?
Well, again, Greg and Carl recorded their parts and they left. Keith there's no producer, right? I don't think there's any producer.
All arrangements by.
No producer credit.
Yeah. Engineered by.
Yep. There's a couple of engineers and Keith put it together with them. The other guys had left town. So that's part of the reason too why it's like Keith kind of had final say for a lot of this. I don't know if he did the track listing, but I know because he's in the books about him or Prog ones, he's very vocal about. Not only did he not, he then I guess set up like a booth in an airport to get people's opinions, and then sent that to Atlantic, and they didn't care. That's what they were going to call it. They picked one of the names of the songs, and that was that.
Well, what else would you have? Taste of My Love would have been a.
No, there's none of them where that really would have worked. Over the years, I've come back to I can only work with what's here,
Yes.
because it's easy. So I've been like, you should have just called it Beach, or Shoreline or something. There could have been a way.
Something,
Well,
not one of the songs.
Yeah, and because memoirs that just wouldn't work. When I was younger, and I made my alternate track listing that I ended up with. So I'll tell people in over the years, and I used to call
if I was in charge
if I
of
was in
Atlantic
charge,
Records.
and I even renamed it. This is when I was a kid. I called it. Is it from or
For You?
no? I would call it letters from the front. That's what I called it. An
Okay.
alternate Love Beach. So Canario starts it. Again, I can only work with what's here and I
Of
can't
course.
chop things up. So Canario starts it. Then All I Want Is You, which actually I don't think is a bad tune. And lyrically, that's still kind of tame. Then For You, which I also think is a pretty good song.
Yeah.
Then The Gambler. Then Love Beach. Then Taste of My Love has to be last because
By
it,
that time, you've hopefully turned it off.
even Love Beach is the thing is to your point, like musically, some of the songs are fine. They
They're
just get
fine,
ruined by the
but they're
lyrics.
also fine.
Right.
They're not like
No, they're
they're
not.
not breaking any new ground musically here to me.
You know, it's funny because if you look at this in the time period, right? Okay, so we got Tormato. It's only 2 years from this point where we get Asia, and like we hoped for so much, and we got that. And I know I've talked to Jay a little about this. In some ways, ELP could have been Asia. Like they didn't. They just wanted to be away from each other at this point. So
Yeah.
they shot themselves in the foot. They could have toured this. They didn't even have to play more than a couple of the songs. And by the way,
Yeah, all they
believe it
had
or
to do,
not,
they could have toured it and done what half the bands do now and played 2 songs from the new
exactly,
album.
and then no one would have cared. But even though Greg and Carl hightailed it out of there, I did read that Carl spent 2 months trying to get Greg and Keith to agree on let's
Yeah.
tour, and he took 2 months, and I guess it was like by February or March and then it was. I think it was by the middle of the year they were done, and then In Concert came out and blah blah blah. But part of the reason for that, I mean, okay, the cover at the time not good, the lyrics questionable, but they just abandoned it. I mean,
They did, but
they
it
could
also
have.
I don't think it stands up to any of their other stuff.
It's not. You're not going to put. Well. Let's not get there. It's a debate whether Love Beach or In the Hot Seat is the worst
Oh, I meant
DLP.
prior to this.
Oh, of course, yes. Prior to this,
They had reached a point that
I mean,
I
nobody will
yeah,
argue that brain salad surgery is their pinnacle. I mean,
right. But
I remember being into them before Works came out.
well, don't
And
tell
when
me what your favorite
no
is
no
because
no
we
no
still have to do the
no no, no,
email.
I know no, but then when Works came out, it was still like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, do you remember?
I
Like
was
you
I
were
got
yeah,
Works later.
but it was the same feeling with Tormato. Like I had an older brother, so he would get this stuff. So he got Tormato, and I'd be like, oh, like you look back on it now and it's like, okay, well, certainly for the day it was advanced, but at the time you were judging it against what had come before, and it was
Of
like,
course, yeah.
I mean, the worst example of that is The Wall. So I am not a Wall fan
Uh-oh.
or well, I'm not waiting for the Pink Floyd
Get ready for
get
the
ready.
comment
Okay.
section.
And I gave it a chance. A friend of mine got it the day it came out. I saw one of the shows at
Yeah.
Nassau Coliseum, and it just didn't do anything for me. But we're not talking
It's
about Pink Floyd now. Let's get back to we're not dissing every prog band right now. It's the Love
every
Beach.
19 late
Yeah.
70s version. I don't know. I think that I'm an apologist for Tormato, but
Well, but you already know Tormato is my
yeah,
number two. Is my
yeah,
number two.
but
You're not an apologist for that.
not
I
at
am.
all.
Well, I'm not an apologist either. I think it's not as bad as people make it out to be.
Listen,
You're not going to
you
pick this
wait.
up. You are not going to pick this up over any other ELP album.
Let's put it this way: the last time I listened to this was I don't have the CD of this. Was when I bought it back as this cutout back when I like listened to it 5 times back in 1982. And I'd
Yeah,
never since it's been sitting up there unlistened to. And then we talked about let's revisit it.
let's
And
revisit it.
so I listened to it like 4 times in a row over the last couple days, and I came to the conclusion that there is nothing I like on it.
Okay. I mean, I can objectively look at this and say, of course, like I said, I mean, shit beach, crap beach, whatever you want to call it.
Tar
But
Beach.
tar beach. But like I said, to me, I'd love to talk to Carl Palmer because I don't know what his feelings are. People ask him about occasionally. He just gives kind of the 30,000 foot brush off that everybody does. But I, to me, again, his performance on this album, if you just don't listen to the lyrics and just listen to the drums, I love his sound and the things that he's doing. There are these little accents he does I've never heard him do again.
Well, it needs a Steve Wilson remix situation that he does an instrumental mix of everything.
Exactly, because like I'm sure you've checked him out on YouTube, the close to the edge
Yeah,
keyboard only mix or
yeah.
guitar only mix. I want to hear a lot. So Steven, if you're listening, because I know you don't like this album at all. Well, he's not really a big ELP fan. I would love to hear the parts of this album, because to me it's you know Carl Palmer first. Keith, without the farty sounds, actually does some really interesting things on the electric piano and the
Yes,
clavinet and some instruments he
but you
didn't
can't
really
divorce
use.
them. I
No,
mean,
you can't.
and that
Also, don't forget, there's a lot of Greg Lake is playing guitar synthesizers, so there's some stuff that might
okay.
be him. What I was going to say, that was nobody was doing that. That he was,
Yeah,
and when you
I think
listen to
probably
the record,
technology wise,
yeah,
they were like, hitting those
yep,
points, right?
yep,
That doesn't necessarily make
right.
that technology good. I think
That's true.
that's one of my issues with Tormato too,
Right.
because I think some of the keyboard sounds on that are pretty wonky.
Well, yeah, well, it's also like to me, that even though again, second favorite album, I love that album, and there's even parts of that I love that I know you're not a fan of,
Yeah.
but it almost sounds like they had a they're having a bro down between
Steve
between
Allen,
Steve Allen and Rick Wakeman. And it was like the rest were
who
just
can play faster
play faster
and
and
higher.
more. Yeah, because they just, I mean, that's part of what makes the album, because it's not just like, it's not like they're two separate people. It intertwines, and it
Yeah.
kind of lifts up. Anyways, we've talked a lot about Tormato.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to talk just a couple of minutes about the time of this, because
Yeah.
like I said, oh, well, they could have potentially been Asia or something like
Yeah.
Asia, because
There was a lot of
there was a lot of
in
turmoil
the
at that
prog
time.
bands at that time.
But they broke up too soon, because they were really the first ones to break up.
Yes.
But I always thought, and then yes, I've told you this before. When I was a kid, I was always like, oh, I could see, because Carl Palmer was off in Asia, I could see, Emerson Lake with Chris Squire and Alan White. Because on this album, on Love Beach, Greg Lake is totally into playing the guitar. I mean, that he plays so much freaking guitar on that, so he would be fine. And I don't think there's anything out there. If anybody knows, please tell us. But there's no examples of Greg and Chris singing together.
No, I don't.
I would
Not
love.
that I know of. I think the only interaction Greg has with Yes People is when he was in Asia.
Right. Oh yeah,
As
you're
far as I
right.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they always seemed a little. It was a different. It was a
I
different
don't know.
time.
Wakeman always speaks very highly of Emerson and was always like, "We were always trying to get
To do
together and do
something.
something."
I know.
Right?
I
So
know.
that
I
closes
know.
that book.
Yeah.
Palmer obviously worked with Yes People.
Yep,
On
and of
that
course,
stage.
obviously Asia, and then
And now
Asia.
he's actually touring. He's done some shows with John Anderson now,
Right.
where the Carl Palmer Experience or
Yep.
whatever it is has been touring with the John and the Band Geeks.
Well, what did you think of Asia and Asia?
I was very excited at the time.
Me too.
Because I already
Yeah.
knew that it wasn't my version of what Prague was.
Right.
But I was still excited at the time that they
Yeah.
were getting all this press, and all these people that I was interested in were like number one, and MTV's doing this big giant thing about them, and I was like, well, finally, like, the bands that I like are getting
some press.
their due, even if it's not my favorite version of the music.
Yeah.
Right. But it was fine.
Yeah.
I'm not a gigantic Asia fan.
I'm not either, but at the time, like we've talked about this before, what was there,
Right.
Particularly, I was an
we
ELP
were,
fan.
we were lucky that these people were still playing and getting record deals, as far as we were concerned, because of the new wave and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really care.
Heat of the Moment was not a bad song, and only
wasn't really an Asia fan, but it was interesting to hear Greg, because he had a great voice, and
I like Carl's work on that better than I do on this.
Okay, I remember saying at the time
he's got that that military beat on this whole album,
right? Well, then that snare sound too. It's that very tight high snare sound. Funny thing about Greg Lake, though, back to the Asia thing, was like I remember watching that and being like musicians from that era, it's a different mentality. Like, he didn't have a lot of prep, but he came out there like it's the show must go on mentality.
Yes.
Like you could
Yeah,
see he just came out there.
this
It didn't matter if you knew the songs or not.
is
He owned it and he barreled through it. And you don't see that as much. Like, it's the whole, they were, Led Zeppelin was sick, but they got on stage and played the best
Yeah,
concert of their life,
but at the same time, it's like, of course he did. I mean,
He didn't want to do it. Like Carl was like, and he's like, I don't really want to do that. And then they
yeah,
they threw money. No, he's like
yeah,
the payday.
the payday
Yeah.
and the world stage and simulcast all
Yeah,
over the world, and I'm Greg Lake. Yeah,
yeah.
come on.
I mean, this isn't the time for it, like, but they are one band that kind of got in their way. They got in their own way, and
Yeah.
they never kind of, they came back in the 90s, and I enjoyed that time. I saw them a number of times. It wasn't the same. Um, but it was a weird time. It's funny in retrospect, this is so of its time too now.
Well, I think that's what they wanted. The
Right.
record company
That's
wanted
what the
their
record
Pablo Cruz
company
album or their whatever,
Firefall. I mean, it looks like the back looks like a million other albums, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought that, it could be a Barry Manilow album. You could put anybody on there.
Which is kind of funny because it's so off-brand.
You know what the funniest thing? Well, to me, the funniest thing is, so, if you have Apple Music, you know this. They animate a lot of album covers. So they animated this
They
album
did?
cover. Yeah.
Oh.
So it's like the background coming forward and they're like coming closer to you. And I'm like, no,
No,
you should be having it
further.
go farther away. It's like in the modern age, this album is more palatable because you can't see the cover.
Right, because the cover's only
The
this
covers
big.
are like, what is it?
It's
Is
on
that
the screen.
I don't even know if that's them or not. So anyways. So at the end, I have an attachment to this album because I heard it when it came out, and The Gambler, of course, was the first thing that stuck in my mind. But over the years, there's a bit. I still, one of my favorite ELP moments is that big instrumental thing before Letters
Yeah.
from the Front. I wish they'd pull that out. It is actually on that remaster you talked about, the 2017.
Yeah.
It's mislabeled as Honorable March.
Yes.
And they call it's just a different mix. There's a few more electric pianos in there. There's a number of, but they do pull that bit out, so at least you can hear that. So.
Yeah.
I'm a thumbs up. I listen. Believe it or not, I still pull it out, and I probably will, over the years will pull this out more than the John Anderson one we just talked about. There's something about this album that It's also, I mean, right? I listen to this and I remember. I go back and I remember November.
Well, but that's
79.
Well, that's sort of more
It's a sentimental or
sentimental,
memory
yes.
attachment.
Yes.
But again, if I feel like hearing some heavy duty Carl Palmer, I'll throw that on because I think his performance on there is amazing. Love to get some people's comments on what you think of Love Beach, and if you don't like it, are there any redeeming qualities? And if
I know,
you do
because
like
for
it,
me, Prog did not find a way to.
well, apparently not. And if you do like it, what do you like about it? Personally, I'd like to hear some more people give any props to this. That they could change it, re-release it. Why did you not do it? So many artists do different covers when they re-release stuff in the modern era.
Yeah. Well, did they re-release this?
Whole nother tangent. The way that the ELP has handled their legacy frustrates me to no end.
I know. You talk about
I think
you talk about it every episode.
No,
even if we're not talking about ELP.
I haven't talked about it in a while, but now that I said it, I remember in a lot of the early ones, I would always bring that up. So that's what I mean by they got in their own way.
Yeah.
I mean, look it's three guys. Rush didn't have a problem. Genesis didn't have the problem.
All right. So I have Return to the Manicore, right?
Yeah, I love that.
What is on here from that? Did they do
memoirs.
the whole one?
Yeah, they put memoirs. Yep.
Okay.
And For You, I think.
Yes.
Yep, For You. For You is one, like For You and All I Want Is You. The lyrics are not as
crazy.
No, and there's some, even like in memoirs, some of the lines, are throwaway, but some of them, like I'm writing to you from a convoy moving west. It's hell out here. We're trying to, like, everybody can relate to that from our era. Like, what they meant. Oh. There's a collective, collective groan across the Prog time.
I think it was the ghosts.
The ghost of Keith
and Greg saying,
"Enough already! Enough already about Love Beach. Why don't you talk about one of our other albums?" So,
anyway,
that's a good time.
Prog will find a way,
despite Love Beach,
if you want it to.